WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I'll tell you what, we're positively into what used to be baseball season. We used to talk about things around here like being in Sarasota and eating delicious Yoder's Amish fried chicken, and what beach we're going to go to. Lido today. What beach we going to today? Luke is here to discuss baseball. I disgusted is what we all are. And do you think they're going to play? People are asking me. I was out all weekend long. People are like, are they really going to play? Are they really going to do this? And I'm like, they're pretty stupid. They've made it this far. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they'll play. The reason I say that is because unlike the 94-95 strike, neither side is jockeying for drastically fundamental change. In the way that the owners wanted to implement a salary cap in 1994, and the players walked out in August as a result. And I think even looking at this, even the players, and one thing, and you and I've talked about this going back, especially the last CBA, maybe not so much 2011-12, that one, but certainly the 2016 one, where I think there was very much a thought of, what's the union trying to get accomplished here? And I recall, there was a lot of talk about extra off days built into the schedule, veterans wanting, their own seat on the bus for spring training, lots of comforts, lots of, luxuries, right? Instead of fundamentally ensuring that player salaries were growing in concert with league revenue that had grown, I think it was 17 straight years of record-setting revenue until, of course, the pandemic year. As I've said all along, as we've talked about this going back to, even before the lockout was implemented in early December, my biggest criticism of the players and the union has been, to me, what has been a sense of complacency over these last couple CBAs. And now you look up and you see owners continuing to generate a ton of revenue, and you have player salaries that, and it's a convenient excuse to use the pandemic if you're ownership. And we've heard Rob Manfred state as much, but player salaries were dipping before that. You go back to 2017, right around then is when it really stagnated, and it's declined since then. And we know it's because why? Free agents, those veterans on the the higher end of the curve, so to speak, in terms of experience, aren't valued at the same way.
And Jones has to go play in Japan. That's what's going on, right?
Well, and at the same time, and look, to be clear, it's fine for ownership to make that determination that younger players are more valuable, but then you need to argue, if you're the union, and this is what they're trying to do with the minimum salary, with pre-arbitration pool, all of that, you need to get the younger guys who are to be paid more. Baseball of the four major sports has the smallest, the lightest minimum salary, yet they use the highest percentage of minimum salary pre-arbitration type players. So it's out of whack. But I think to bring it back to the original question, because I'm getting off track here a little bit, but I think they will play, because as much as, to me, the union really should be, and as much as I say this, I say it in a vacuum, because I understand, ownership's not going for it at this point unless you truly do want to have a year or two without baseball. But, I think fundamental changes that would, to me, result in the season being lost in its totality would be if players were fighting to have free agency come 6 years after you're drafted, as some people have suggested. So you'd eliminate service time manipulation. You'd eliminate a lot of the problems we're seeing in the minor leagues in terms of just terrible treatment and low wages and poor working conditions, all of that. So you'd look at that, trying to upend this arbitration model, all of those different things, but it's not any of that. Even now, the most recent offers the players have made, I look at the terms of it and I say, I don't really see what the players are gaining here other than really stopping the bleeding of just how much they've really lost here over the last several years.
Yeah, the days of Marvin Miller and Don Fear coming in with the hammer, it doesn't feel like they have the ability to do that. And more than that, this freight train that is BAM, or what was perceived to be, plus how the Cubs are making a fortune off of like everything around Wrigleyville.
Right.
Atlanta's making that money. Now, I don't know whether Angelos is going to be able to hoodwink Hogan or whoever the next governor is, Francho, Moore, Schultz, I pick whoever you want. But wherever this is going to go, the Orioles aren't drinking from that way that maybe some other teams are drinking from that. And part of that also is the gambling part. The gambling part where the casino's attached to the stadium and all of that. That's where the real juice is going to be over the next 10 or 15 years, that if the players don't get a drink in that, it's going to be a lot like the football owners holding club seats back from being shared and, different revenue streams that the union's aware of, but can't get a bite of that apple.
Yeah. I mean, and as much as they can try to get, playoff money. I mean, we're going to be going from 10 to at least 12. I mean, that's a fait accompli, and it seems that ultimately it feels like it'll get to 14.
And better chance for the Orioles to make the playoffs.
Yeah.
You still can't lose 100 games and do that, but
Well, I would say this. I mean, the owners love it, and as much as I hear people that are even objective, I mean, independent media, fans, whoever it might be, I hear people saying expanded playoff field leads to more teams trying. I'm sorry, I don't buy that. Everything that we see the owners do is done with what in mind? Cutting costs, cutting labor costs, making things cheaper to do. So I look at it in terms of, yeah, they're going to get more playoff revenue because that's all they care about now, and completely bastardizing a 162 game schedule and making it utterly meaningless. They don't care about as long as it means more money in October. And, and look, I mean, you can make an argument, I guess, that, the NBA and the NHL has heard those criticisms for years, and, it hasn't killed their sports. But I look at that. I look at, you just mentioned all the different things at work here that, I don't know what recourse the players really have at this point to really make fundamental changes. And this kind of brings me back to, I think what frustrates me is I look at time now being lost, and what's going to be gained out of this? I think we've talked about, you and I've talked about this a lot, and we talked about this 2 years ago with all the arguing and bitter feelings that we saw in the midst of trying to restart the season in July amidst the pandemic. And if you told me there was going to be a lengthy work stoppage, but I thought it would fundamentally make, that would lead to some fundamental changes that I think would be good for the game in the long term, then not to say that I would be doing cartwheels over it, but I feel like you could accept it a little bit more. But I just, like I said, the asks of the players are not really going to change anything that dramatically. And, as much as the CBT, the competitive balance tax, the luxury tax threshold, however you want to describe it, I still even look at that and say, well, you can raise that, but in the absence of any kind of a salary floor, and we know that the CBT has become a soft cap that's getting more rigid by the year. I mean, my goodness, one of the biggest things that I've been sharing with people trying to explain this, and look, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm very well versed in labor and collective bargaining between the players and owners, but to tell you that something's out of whack, Nestor, the New York Yankees in 2021 had a payroll essentially exactly the same as it was in 2005. Think about that. The Yankees. We're not talking about the Orioles here or the Marlins.
I think revenues were a little different in the new stadium and the Yes Network.
But think about that. Right, exactly. Since 2005, they opened a new stadium in the Bronx, largely with public funding. The Yes Network sold, a couple years ago, I think it was at $2.5 billion. It sold for an insane amount of money. And yet you're telling me the Yankees have roughly the same payroll as they did 16 years ago? That tells you what the CBT is doing right there. So, and as much as you can raise that, again, nothing is stopping these teams that, look at Derek Jeter walking out the door in Miami. I think it's obvious. Unless something comes out that is not on anyone's radar, it feels pretty evident that he was made promises when he agreed to become president of the Marlins down there that they would be spending money. And yeah, they were going through a rebuilding period, but there would be money to spend on baseball players and building a playoff caliber roster that could really compete. And, I think it's been evident that, he walked away kind of realizing that wasn't going to happen. So So to bring it back to your original question, yes, I do think they're going to be playing baseball. No, I don't think it's imminent. I kind of feel you rip that Band-Aid off of missing games and missing opening day, that I think both sides dig their heels in a little bit more. And I've said, I mean, I was even talking about this over the weekend with some family members who were asking me what I thought about it. And I kind of said at the time, I'd be surprised if they're playing before May. I mean, so, and it's not even that bold at this point. I mean, we know the first week of the regular season's already gone. So,
well, there's a feeling like, how can they not play?
Right.
But then again, there is the John Angelos thing and the Miami Marlins thing of, well, it's a little late to start now anyway, and how much money are we going to lose this year instead of make this year? And do we really want to play under these conditions? And where are we going to be 5 years from now as owners of poor teams, where nobody's gambling on our games, nobody's coming to our games, our city's burning down? I mean, I can hear all of those talking points. I would like to think that there are people invested in the sport who would like to get on the field. I don't feel that from ownership. I don't feel the ownership of the Cincinnati Reds or the Philadelphia. I don't even know who the hell owns these teams. They don't want you to know who owns these teams. But whoever those decision makers are, they don't feel in any hurry to get back on the field. It's always the workers, the rank and files, the Scherzers who's losing 230 grand a day or whatever it is, right? And it's when does Adley Rutschman get his clock started? When does the rank and file major league player making their $700,000 a year, when do they get back and start getting their paychecks? I don't know at what point the union starts to collapse, or in the old days you'd never think that. But you said from the beginning they're trying to break the union. They won't break the union. Well, they're trying to buckle the union. And the longer this goes on, they don't care about Sarasota or Florida or grapefruit or cactus or opening day or April revenue. The owners are thinking, let's crush them. Let's kick 6% off them over the next 5 years and compound that. And we'll, what the hell does 20 games mean in April? In 2025, and we got the deal we want, and we've not broken the union, but we buckled them a little bit. And we got that gambling money coming in, and we got that new stadium going up, and that new thing we're doing in the parking garage that they don't drink in. That's how the owners are thinking. And the fact that the owners have gone this far, lockout, aggressive, shut them down. The owners have no interest in playing baseball in April. None. Zero.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the big factors, and I know there's been some reporting done on this, and obviously every situation, every market is going to be unique and not necessarily have the same terms. But I think, you've seen some talk as far as the RSNs with, you get to a point where how many games do you miss before you have lost revenue as far as your broadcast rights. So, I think that could be another factor that kind of feels like May would be it. But, I think to your point that you just made, as much as you have the owners who, don't care at all about playing baseball in April, there are others who want to. The Dodgers want to play. Teams of that nature, teams that are still going to draw 3 million people. I mean, there aren't a ton of teams left like that, but they want to play. But, I think you look at attendance, again, what you just mentioned, can you miss April games and it not really harm ownership? I mean, look, these guys are billionaires compared to some players being millionaires and players at the bottom of the barrel not being millionaires or anything close to it. But I do think the regional sports networks, the broadcast rights, how many games can you miss? And this was talked about, 2 years ago with the pandemic and how that all shook out. But I think that's a factor that probably pushes the owners to want to have baseball back on the field. I would assume at some point in May. But I think, that in general, everyone will talk about attendance. And I know Travis Salchik, who used to write for 538, covered the Pirates years ago, has written a couple books, talking about analytics, MVP baseball, as far as player development, technology. He had a thread last week kind of looking at attendance. And, you look at work stoppages that cost games. 1972, attendance fell just under 4%. 81, fell just under 7%. 1995, and of course, we're talking about a much longer work stoppage, lost the World Series for the first time in a century. It was a 20% dip. And I think that initial dip probably wasn't surprising. We all remember what those stadiums everywhere but Camden Yards, what it looked like that late April and May in 1995. But I think what's kind of wild is looking back at that, and he noted per game attendance didn't recover until those pre-strike 1993-94 levels until 2006. I mean, it took over a decade for baseball to get to that point. And now you consider that they've been in the midst of a period of some declining interest, declining attendance. You're in a period of time now where the economy is not exactly great, and anyone going, even driving to the ballpark, how much more that's costing you right now with gas prices and just the fact that we've been on, we're 2 years into a pandemic that really upended our entire way of life in many instances. There's not much public appetite for this. So you have the attendance element, but going back to the RSNs, going back to these regional sports networks, I mean, we know this model is failing. It's just a matter of when is it the bottom going to completely fall out.
Well, it's really failing here when you tack on the fact that you and your brother can't even watch the games. If you buy their package, you don't get their games.
Or how about the fact? Right. Or how about the fact that I've been paying for it all off season? I haven't even turned it on. Over the weekend, they had ACC, which doesn't mean anything here anymore because the Terps aren't in the ACC. They had ACC women's basketball tournament games on MASN. They're part of that, whatever regional coverage or whatever package that they pick up.
It's been a scam from the beginning, and when I call it a scam, I'm just a prick on the radio. But the MASN thing from the beginning, they talked about running it like New England Sports Network with a news division and a news desk and like real people, and it's been nothing but one big titty for them to just drink money in while the organization and the franchise has faltered over the last 15 years. I mean, it's disgraceful that you and your family have forked over 60, 80 bucks, whatever it's been, since the last time you put on their shitty baseball. You and everybody else. I don't pay them anymore. I cut the cord. I got a picture of me in the parking lot taking my 3 boxes back to Xfinity. For the first month of my life, the Angelos family got nothing out of me in February. Nothing. I do not subscribe to MASN. I probably will never subscribe to MASN. F them. So there. How about that? And if I got to give them $129 because they decide to win 90 games one year, and I get the games like you kids do on my app and on my phone, and I can watch it when I'm sitting somewhere, or I'll go to the bar and watch it when I want to. But I'm done. I'm so glad that I cut the cord, and now I get to pick that I'm not giving those creeps at Fox News, those traitors, a nickel to lie to my grandmother about Donald Trump's involvement with Putin. So there's a whole thing with cable television that this has been a scam that over the last 15 years, not just a scam for Angelos, but a scam for a lot of those channels you never saw that you're paying $1.20 a month for that you don't know about. That I feel good about that because you mentioned MASN. It's the first time I've even thought out loud that they're not getting money from me because he was getting $100 a year, $200 a year from me. No mas.
Well, but this, everything you just laid out, though, that's the concern in every market at this point. I mean, you have more and more in 1994, 95, and clearly there were a lot of games on cable that this was home team sports era, but there weren't going to be people that were going to cancel their cable subscription or their satellite subscription because of the lockout. But when you consider what you just mentioned, cutting the cord, satellite, cable, looking for streaming services. I mean, as of the end of last year, the only streaming service MASN was available on was DirecTV streaming, their streaming subscription. So very limited. It's not on YouTube TV. It's not on
Maybe
Hulu.
This is why
it's not
Angelos
on any of
doesn't
those.
want to start the season. He knows nobody's watching the games, right?
But again, this goes so far beyond the Orioles, though, and this is where.
But he's got to vote. There's 30 votes on whether they're going to play or not.
I understand, but I'm trying to talk.
Paul McCartney press conferences. Somebody should be responsible for this.
No, I don't disagree with you, but I'm trying to talk about this because we're asking the question when they're going to play again. The Orioles aren't making that decision solely. It's the 30 owners together. But when you have a way of life that is really changing in terms of people's viewing habits, it is a very dangerous proposition when you're already talking about how many people are cutting the cord for cable or satellite, have been doing that. And now you have baseball fans who have been hanging on, who are now ticked off because you're not playing. Or maybe worse than ticked off, they're indifferent. You mentioned a lot of anger. I'm not sure how much anger there is, Nestor. I think it's a lot more shoulder shrugging, where I'm not saying people are necessarily saying they're done, meaning they'll never come back. But I do think it's a lot of people that are just they're more apathetic about it. And they'll say, you know what? I guess they'll play at some point later this year. And depending on how interesting it is, or, if there's a giveaway I really like, or someone offers me cheap tickets or free tickets, yeah, and maybe I'll listen on the radio. But, I was kind of thinking I need to save some money, and, gas prices are insane right now, and this is going on and that's going on. You know what? This isn't that important to me anymore. And you know what? NCAA, March Madness is starting, and the NBA playoffs and the NHL playoffs are going to be coming in April, and I'm into lacrosse, or I'm into whatever else. I'm into Major League Soccer, whatever. I mean, there's we've talked about this. Every sport other than the NFL is niche now. They just don't, whether they admit it or not, they are. I mean, that's just the truth. There's one bulletproof major professional sport here in North America, and it's the NFL. So you look at all of that, but I just, I look at the regional sports network debate and where that's going. Obviously baseball, they put out their statement before, I think it was the day before the announcement about the cancellation of the first two series of the season with MLB TV, which is a very good streaming package, except for what? In-market streaming. You can subscribe to MLB TV and get
everything you want but the games.
But the Orioles. You get everything but the Orioles. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
Everything but what you want.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I just look at all this, and that's why although I would have said, and as I wrote at BaltimorePositive.com, I was there the final Friday night home game of the season, Orioles against the Rangers. Beautiful, beautiful night. 71 degrees first pitch. Regardless of the fact it was two lousy teams, if you're a baseball fan, it was a fun night to go downtown to the ballpark and watch a game. And this game had been on the schedule since the previous summer. Wasn't a makeup, wasn't lousy weather, anything like that. I think the announced attendance was 7,800 people. There weren't more than 2,000 or 3,000 people in the ballpark on a Friday night. Originally scheduled game, nice weather. Last Friday night home game of the year. And I looked at that, and I remember even thinking it at the time. And I snapped a picture because I thought I was going to say, you know what, this will be a great lead for some off-season piece on. And I didn't think it was going to be the lockout per se, but I thought just on, wow, the Orioles need to get this rebuild right. They better hope this works, because you're seeing what the baseline is. You're seeing what the base is at this point in time. Beautiful September final Friday night home game of the year. And there aren't more than 2,000 or 3,000 people here. And I'm not blaming fans, to be clear. It just shows interest being that low at that point in time. And, you see that, and then you think, these guys are really not going to play. They're really not going to be out there on opening day. 2 years after a pandemic wiped away opening day in roughly 4 months of a baseball season, you're really not going to play, and you're deliberately making that decision. Boy, that takes some gall. And boy, you're running a lot of risk there to, not just attendance, but RSNs, the bottom finally dropping out there, and more people canceling cable and satellite. And so it's just, there's so much about this that already feels insane. And again, we're not even talking about either side looking to drastically change something from a fundamental structure standpoint. They're arguing over money. I mean, and it's a sizable amount. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be dismissive of it, but again, we're not trying to completely upend the structure of how things are done. The players aren't looking for free agency to go from 6 years of service time to 3. It's nothing radical. It's just, the players are trying to stop the bleeding, really. But the owners, and they've been enabled, because like I said, I think the union did a poor job the last couple CBAs, and it's tough to stop that once that gets rolling downhill. And ask the NFLPA what the 80s were like when the NFL puts replacement players out there and breaks a union. We talk about those sports in terms of CBAs and negotiating and everything, but the leagues have all the power. And baseball, as much as you mentioned, whether you're talking about Marvin Miller or Donald Fear back in the 90s, or they always took a lot of pride in being the strongest of the 4 major sports as far as a union goes, but those days are long gone. And you look at this and you see some of the, even some of the rule changes they're proposing for 2023, pitch clock and banning the shift and all these different things. And, I just look at this and I kind of just shrug my shoulders and say, all right, they're going to play again, but I don't know if anything that's coming is going to make this better and turn this thing around for them. And I think that's got to be a really scary thought for, I think, everyone other than these owners who are just going to cozy up to October playoff TV revenue and they'll be fine. But that is still going to lead to problems down the road that you're not going to be able to live off that forever if the game continues to trend in the way it is.
Well, you got to get a sport that's struggling, that's sliding away from people, and they've decided to shut it down. It just tells you how amazingly tone deaf. They're all as dumb as Angelos was. They're all as out of touch as Angelos was before he started eating pudding. And they're not out in front of this. And every fan and the Players Association using their social media has made the owners the bad guys.
Yeah.
You hate the owners. You're mad at everyone's mad at the owners, and the owners don't even have a face other than this lawyer prick up in New York who comes out and scowls at everybody. He's the face of them. And John Angelos comes out with his boots on a Zoom and acts like there's no lockout. Just buy the McCartney tickets. They're $500 a piece. Line up, Luke. You and your mom, your brother and sister, you got $2,400 for 4 this time around for the $320 you paid up in Hershey 6 years ago. Like, it's incredible, but they're shameless. I mean, I've always said that. Shameless when that song came out, Garth Brooks and Billy Joel sang that song, Shameless, 25 years ago. I used to play that song on the radio back when I had an ASCAP license. And just shameless. They are without shame. And another day, another week, opening day, start the season May 14th, let 15 teams into the play, whatever, it doesn't matter. They have no pride about their game. They only have pride about how much money they make because the game's not any good.
I mean, there are certainly things you can do to make the game better. I mean, I still love baseball, but as I've said for feels like years now, my disdain for Major League Baseball continues to grow. And
Mahler's grandkids playing over at Gilman. There's going to be baseball everywhere.
Oh, sure.
Here, right?
Well, and something that we've talked about the last couple of years. I mean, hey, you can go see Adley Rutschman this summer. You can go see Grayson Rodriguez this summer, even if they're not playing at the major league level. So, I mean, anyone that's not on the 40-man roster is eligible, and minor league camps are going to be, really be ratcheting up.
I got a barbecue spot in Norfolk, you and me. I'm telling you right now.
Right. But I just, one thing I'll disagree with you on, as much as I think anyone who takes any semblance of interest or has any kind of a rudimentary understanding of 100+ years of labor relations in Major League Baseball certainly recognizes the owners being at fault. But I think where the danger lies and what's frustrating for the players and anyone else with the vested interest, I mean, keep in mind, you're going to start seeing team employees probably, if this stretches too long, you'll see people furloughed because it happened 2 years ago. I mean, these guys don't care about the little guy within the organization. They'll lay people off for, furlough them, whatever it might be. But I think with a very meaningful percentage of the fan population, they care about one thing, Nestor, and it's not to look at the intricacies of the CBA. This is their leisure. You and I talk about this for a living, but this is their leisure time. They ask you one question: is there baseball going on? And if you say no, they say bleep all them. And when they say all them, they mean the owners bringing everyone down with them: players, other employees, vendors, stadium workers, local businesses that depend on baseball season, as far as bars and
these things that I reported on all of 1993 and 94 and into 95 back the first time around, when I began my career and we didn't have a football team here. You and I are on to other things. We've already spent an hour this morning talking about the football team, right? Like literally, which is something we did not have in 1994. All we had in 1994 was, Peter's out today talking about Cal Ripken. At least Peter was out in front of it back in 19. And he really was. I mean, he was out in front of it, being the prick that he is for the whole world to see every single day. And that was the George Steinbrenner was out in front of it in 1994, right? Like they all were. Paul Beeston was out. They were all out in front of it. Now there's nobody out in front of it. So much so that we don't know what they look like anymore.
But one thing I'll disagree. The perception of him was way different in 1994. And this is something, again, if you're talking about how it relates to the Orioles, 1995, Camden Yards was 3 years old. It was still very much a touristy destination. People from around the greater Baltimore, Washington area. There was no team in D.C. Lots of people wanted to see the ballpark still. Lots of people from out of town still wanted to see the ballpark at high levels, high volumes of people. You had that. You had the fact that Peter Angelos was less than 2 years removed from restoring local ownership to the franchise after Eli Jacobs and all of that.
He was paying a hell of a debt note at that point too, and needed to get the team back on the field.
But you had that.
He was printing money at the time. Peter was. He wanted to play.
But he was a hero at that point in time, and he didn't field replacement players. He was one of the few owners that voted against the salary cap when they put it to a vote in February of '95, whenever it was. You could tell I read up on this recently.
Stupidly, by the way, because the salary cap would have been the thing that saved baseball, and I said that 30 years ago. And I saw that when the All-Star game came in there in '93 and they were selling off. I mean, it's amazing the Padres didn't sell off Tony Gwynn at that point, right? But all these sell-offs that happened with these teams, that's what was going on in the '90s, was selling off baseball players, and Peter was the guy buying them. So there was a different tone amongst people printing money. I don't know which of the baseball teams are printing money right now. I guess the Braves are printing money. There's a couple of those, and they're owned by the Liberty Mutual conglomerate of the South, of the bank, of the trust, of the. They don't have an owner. It's not Ted Turner sitting with Jane Fonda doing chops now, right? It's a whole different level of who owns these teams, and where Mr. Big sits and says on the spreadsheet, 12%'s enough for me this year. Where there's guys like Angelos and Derek Jeter jumped off the boat down in Miami, right? So that happened. All of a sudden, he was going to come save Miami. He's like, "Here's the keys. I don't want anything to do with this," right? Yeah. So these pauper franchises, the Rays, the A's, these teams that are always struggling, they don't want to play, and they want to get every nickel they can out of the players because they need it. Unlike the Yankees, who don't need it.
But I would also say they're all making money. I mean, come on, they're all making money. Now it might be. It's varying degrees, but they're all making money. Yeah, I mean they're all making money. I mean, can every team in baseball have a $300 million payroll? No, but every team in baseball could afford more than a $50 million payroll. So right there, and the story, and the discussion right there. So I mean, it's just I look at all of this and I see what they've relied on to make money, and you look at it, what's impact this is going to have on attendance. It's certainly going to hurt it. It's just going to be a matter of whether it hurts or whether it's going to be catastrophic for them in the way that you look at 1995, 20% dip in increase. I mean, my goodness. But again, the failing regional sports networks, what does that mean? Do you have more and more people cut the cord in the process of saying, you know what, I've been thinking about this anyway, and I've been debating whether it's worth it anyway. They're not even playing. So I'll cancel DirecTV or Dish or whatever it might be, and I'll go get YouTube TV for a third of the price of what I'm paying right now. So, or I'll get Disney streaming or whatever it might be. I mean, there's lots of options out there, and that's part of what the insanity is for me. We've talked about baseball in an in-market sense having an accessibility problem. When you're talking about not having streaming options, and the fact that you're stuck having to pay cable or satellite prices to watch however many baseball games you watch a year as a fan, and just what that's been, and the lack of accessibility and availability for young people and families who don't have cable and satellite, and how many kids aren't even watching the product. And we've talked about and the same arguments you can have about any of the four sports and prices and all of that. But a sport that has been criticized for not making its games easily available and to be accessible to people who don't necessarily have an unlimited amount of disposable income, to their advantage, that now you're on top of all that, you're going away. I mean, the number of times, and I wrote this at BaltimorePositive.com, the number of times over the last, go back 5-6 years, even before the Orioles, even before the bottom fell out in 2018, the number of people in my life who have said to me at various times, I'd like to watch more games, but I don't have satellite or cable anymore, or I can't afford it, or even look at somewhere like Pennsylvania, southern Pennsylvania, with some of the radio rights, with certain stations not being available, and signals blocked from the north and things of that nature. I mean, so many different things you can point to and say. So many people saying, "Yeah, I'd like to watch more games," but well, we're all saying that right now because they're not playing, and we're now approaching mid-March, and who knows when they're going to get back on the field. And I don't think the season's going to be canceled. I don't think they're going to lose the entire season. But at this point, as I said, once they rip the Band-Aid off of opening day, I think there's probably a tendency on both sides. And let's keep in mind, we're talking about very competitive people on both sides of the ledger here, both sides of the argument, that there is a tendency, I think, to dig your heels in a little more and say, well, if we lost the first series or the first two series of the season, what's going to be another few weeks? If it means we can try to get what we want. So we'll see how it plays out. But I think, much of the anger, as you mentioned, I think is going to turn to, some resignation here sooner rather than later. And it's going to be the worst thing for baseball if you have more and more people just kind of say, oh, well, it's on to something else. Had an entire spring and summer without baseball 2 years ago because of the pandemic, and life carried on, and there'll be more to do than was the case 2 years ago. So I think that's the very significant danger here for baseball, that they won't feel in their pockets now, but 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, it's the same argument we keep talking about, especially when you're talking about an audience that trends older and older all the time.
He is Luke Jones. At some point, we will announce one morning that they're coming back. They're playing baseball, Luke. It's going to be great. But it's not today. So maybe it'll be tomorrow. I don't know, though. I would give the celebration if they tell me they're bringing baseball back and there's no shift. That would excite me. It would excite me if, I've been looking at a lot of old baseball cards from the 70s because I follow a bunch of 70s sports Twitter handles and stuff. Every once in a while, some great picture of Willie Stargell or Ron Say or, will pop up, or Johnny Bench chasing a foul ball at the 1970 World Series will pop up. And I just think of how much I loved it. And I'm so far gone now, 16 years after having my press pass taken away. 16 years it's been since I did Free the Birds. 16 years! It's unbelievable. Feels like a minute and a half ago. I've come to the grand conclusion that it's just never going to be important in my life again. As an Aparicio, I've come to that grand conclusion because I don't think the people that run it are ever going to be able to fix it, to make it something that I want to invest that kind of time in. When I think about how much time in the first 40, I'm 6 years removed from going to 30 ballparks in 30 days. I lost 30 days with my dead cat, who's gone now, traveling around to sit in Kansas City and Arizona and St. Louis and Atlanta to love their game. F them. I'm on the rock concert belts, waiting for John Mayer to come back and Merriweather to open up, football season to start. March Madness to begin next week. We're going to be at El Guapo on Thursday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. That's from 1 till 5. Got great guests. Jane Miller's going to be joining us, Rob Robble and Damian O'Doherty and friends. Next Friday, we're going to be at Costas, not watching baseball. We'll be watching March Madness next Friday, the 18th, from 2 until 5. Come on down to Costas, say hello, get a crab cake. By the way, the Betty Boop scratch-off tickets are around, and there's winners in my stack. I found this out over the weekend, so come get yourself a Maryland Lottery scratch-off Betty Boop ticket from me. We're going to be at Fadley's on the 23rd from 9 until noon in the morning, special morning edition, and that's a Wednesday. So that's this month, a bunch of stuff next month, and then in May I'm going to be everywhere as the weather breaks. So big appreciation to the Maryland Lottery for sponsoring us, as well as Goodwill Industries. Goodwill Industries just signed up to sponsor the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. I'm going to have to get me a Goodwill hat to have that around this week as well. And also Wise Markets, of course, Wise Conversations as we have around here as well. I am Nestor. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Luke's covering football because there ain't no baseball. Back for more on Baltimore Positive right after this.